Welcome back to Meticulous Mechanic. In the last video, we removed the master cylinder cap and got ready to add some hydraulic fluid in here. If you're doing a regular service, this hydraulic fluid would be dirty, so you'd want to suck it out with a syringe. You could buy a vacuum bleeder that's hooked up to your compressor, but I just bought this. It was a lot cheaper and I don't do it all the time. This was about $40. The applications are vacuum testing, brake bleeding, and fluid transfer. Obviously, we're going to be using it for brake bleeding. It's basically just a hand pump that creates vacuum. I just pulled these hoses out. This is what I used last time. That's the main bleeding hose. And this is the main container. I just cut off a little section of hose, which I'm going to hook up to there. When I squeeze this lever, it'll create a vacuum here. And that's the gauge. Then I'm going to hook up a hose here that's going to go over to the bleed nipple on the bike. When you do this, like I said before, you want to suck the old hydraulic fluid out. So what I did is I just put this, it comes with one nozzle, and I put that here and I hooked it up to there. And then I just suck the fluid out of the master cylinder and it sucks it into here. But I'm not going to use this time. I'm just going to hook this up to the bleed nipple, and I'm going to hook this up over here like that. I put on safety glasses in case it splashes back in my face, and I wrapped a rag around here in case I bump the handlebars or something and it spills. Then take your syringe and just fill this up. I already have it mostly full because I've done this once before. Then you can set it in here in this thing we made yesterday. If you had a straight path from the master cylinder down to a single caliper, you could just open the bleed nipple and probably gravity would force the fluid down. But my hose comes over to this caliper and then over the fender to the other side. So you always want to start at the opposite, the farthest away from the master cylinder. So we're going to be using this bleed nipple here. The handlebars were trying to spin on me, so I just tied them down on each side. Now the handlebars can't accidentally rock on me. First thing you do is just remove this rubber cap. That just keeps the dirt out. Put an 8mm wrench on here. I might invest on one of those bleeders that hook up to a compressor, because you would just hook this hose up to here now, turn on the compressor, and it would create a constant vacuum. But I'm just going to do it the hard way this time, so I'll put this hose on here. The biggest problem I've had bleeding brakes over the years is this hose. It just falls off the bleed nipple. It'd be nice if they made something that was integrated so this couldn't fall off. What I'm going to do until then is hook up this Motion Probe mini bleeder. This one's kind of cool because it has the wrench integrated, so you go like this, and instead of using that 8mm, you just crack the bleed nipple like that, and you can come up and turn in different areas. It actually has a one-way check valve in here, so let's see how this works. I'm ditching this piece of hose and this wrench. We'll try something better. But what I was saying is, if you have this piece of hose and you put it on here, it always just falls off on you. You need to be able to have something that clamps and stays. So that'll be a good thing to bring to market if someone wants to invent it. I might do it if I had the time. I'm going to hook up this system here. This one you just slide onto the bleed nipple like this. It's got a rubber grommet on the inside. Usually you open 1/4 to 1/8 of a turn. Then I'm watching up by the master cylinder to see if it's starting to flow. It says it's pulling 20 kilopascals of vacuum. Looks like it's starting to come. You can see some fluid coming up through there now. Like it's trying, because it's actually sucking on empty lines at this point. So that vacuum had to go all the way up from, well, the left caliper all the way over the fender, and then up the hose to the master cylinder. I'm watching the master cylinder. I don't want it to go dry, because then you kind of lost the whole point of this. So I'm going to just let this go until some fluid starts flowing. Looks like it's actually helping me out like I wanted. I'll put a few more times. I think you can see air coming out of the line. So when the lever's open, the fluid can flow. I'm watching over here to make sure it doesn't get too low. Looks like we're getting a little more action down at the bottom. This is where the syringe is nice because now I can just top this off very easily. Definitely get some more action. Actually getting some fluid out at the bottom now, not just all bubbles. I've dropped from 20 to about 17 pounds. One of the other goals in this procedure is not to get brake fluid on these rotors. Very easy to spill some off this bleed nipple. So I'm going to go ahead and put a rag on this just for safety. I probably should have done this first, but usually you don't spill it, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's starting to look a little better down below here. What I noticed was this wrench. If you close the bleed nipple like that, and then I had it open, I thought a quarter to an eighth, like I thought I had it there, but the hose was spinning it back, which was closing it. So what I did is I rotated the hose so it'll stay like this. Now we're starting to get mainly fluid and a few bubbles. This would be how a gravity bleed would work, but I'm assisting it with some vacuum here. Eventually the fluid will come down here and get caught in this cup. It doesn't get sucked into this vacuum mechanism here. Now I'm getting a bubble fluid. Once the bubbles stop, I'm going to tighten the bleed nipple. And then at the end, you can pump up the lever, and I'll show you that. That'll be the last step. You need to make sure it's not leaking down from under here. So I've tucked the rag up better. I've had ones where the bleed nipple really leaks a lot, but this one seems to not be leaking. You can see the little port opening when I squeeze the lever on the left there. Now we're getting more fluid and less bubbles. If you were just flushing the system and there was already fluid in there, it'd be a lot easier, but I had totally empty master cylinder lines and calipers, so that's why it's taking so long. Sometimes what's happening is you think you're getting all this air out of the line in the system, but it's just kind of leaking around the threads on the bleed nipple. I'm going to shut this for now and then see how the lever feels. Pull this off. I have a rag underneath so if it spills. I'll definitely consider buying one of those compressor-driven vacuum devices in the future. I've hooked up a basic gravity bleed system. I just have a hose coming off the bleed nipple and then down into this container, pumping the lever at the top. There we go, that's a good sign. Making sure I don't run out of fluid. Go ahead and pump it a few more times. The trick now is to close the bleed nipple. The final step is to pump up the lever up top. And then while you're holding the lever down, open the bleed nipple. And then leave the lever closed and close the bleed nipple. Pump the lever up again. And then hold the pressure. Open the bleed nipple. And then close it. And just keep doing that. One good check after that is to squeeze the lever, and it's nice and firm. It feels like it should. And then look over in here, and if you squeeze it and no more bubbles come out, squeeze it slowly. See how there's no more bubbles? I'm going to go ahead and check the other caliper and make sure no bubbles are trapped over here. I'm going to put a rag around here just to protect the rotor and everything. I'm just going to pump the lever and crack the bleed nipple and see if any air comes out. So I'm pumping up the lever. Now I'm holding the lever down. Allow the lever to go all the way to the handlebar. Then I'm going to retighten the bleed nipple. I see one tiny bit of air. I'm going to pump up the lever again. Open the bleed nipple. Close the bleed nipple. Let the lever down. Pump the lever up again. Hold it. Open the bleed nipple. Close the bleed nipple. Pump the lever up. Do it one more time. Squeeze the lever all the way to the handlebar. That looks good. I'm not getting any air out of here now. The trick to getting this hose off without getting fluid all over the place is to kind of rock the hose backwards and get the rag right underneath. There was a little sponginess in the lever, I could tell. So when I bled that other side, that made that better. I'm going to go and check the other side now one more time, just to make sure. So I'm putting the wrench on the bleed nipple and I'm attaching the hose. Pump the lever, hold some pressure, open the bleed nipple, close the bleed nipple. Cinch down the bleed nipple now. I'm going to take the hose off. Try not to get fluid everywhere. The good thing is I didn't get it on the rotor or the pads. And double check to make sure this is tight. So you need to pull this lever slow. As you can see, it kind of pops up. So then I'm going to wipe this off. Looks like the level's full. When you go to put the cap on, make sure you wipe right here. Cap on. 2 GIS screws. Go ahead and tighten those down, and as you go back and forth, as I tighten it down, a little bit there, a little bit there. Just kind of bring them down evenly. Don't overdo it when you tighten them. It's just a tiny little thread into aluminum. If you spilled any, wipe it off. The last thing I like to do before I install this rubber cap on here, that just keeps the dirt off your bleed nipple, is to take a little piece of Kleenex, spin it like this, stick it in the hole, stick it in the hole like that, because there's a little bit of hydraulic fluid right there. You can see how that came out wet. I just do that a couple times because that way, you probably don't have to do this, but it just keeps you don't need hydraulic fluid in that hole there. So once you do that, now when you put your cap on, it stays clean under the cap too. If you watch the video where I reinstalled the caliper, I hadn't tightened these 2 bolts here because I wanted to get the hydraulic fluid in here first. So the last thing to do is to squeeze the brake lever and tighten the 2 bolts. That way it kind of centers it on there better. So I'm squeezing the brake lever up here. I've spun the wheel a few times to try to get things centered. Squeeze the lever and then kind of tighten back and forth. So that one a little, that one a little. So you get to the 35. Squeezing fairly hard. That one's good. I'll do the other side the exact same way. Now hopefully the wheel spins good now. That's pretty good. They always rub a little bit. The last thing I wanted to show you was the aluminum tape trick. I have this aluminum tape in here, Intertape. I've had it a long time. The brake fluid likes to absorb moisture from the air. I could put this cap right on, but I don't think it's going to seal very well. So what I do is I wipe this off really well, get any of that hydraulic fluid off. Get a piece of the foil tape, cut it off. It's hard to get the backing off. If you fold a tiny corner like this and bring it back, then that'll give you a place to get an X-Acto blade in there. And then you can peel it off easy. Then just lay the tape right on the hole and run your finger all the way around like that. I like to have one X-Acto blade that's super sharp. Then if you just cut around with your super sharp blade, kind of angle the blade like this, helps to have the brand new blade. So now you got a new cover that's totally sealed out from the moisture in the air. And if you put this cap back on, it should stay fresh a lot longer for your next job. I probably wouldn't keep it over a year, but if you're going to use it in a couple months or 6 months, it should be fine.